Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. Aubergines, eggplants, they're loved by so many. Now we grow them as an annual in this country. Now if you want to know how to overwinter them, watch this video and I'll show you exactly how I'm going to go about overwintering my aubergines. We've had an absolutely wonderful season with aubergines. You can see these long purple variety. And they come in all sorts of different varieties. You've got long dark ones like these that you've commonly used to seeing in the shops. You've got the white aubergines that are very famous in India and Bangladesh and Pakistan and that sort of area, and you've got purple, white ones, stripy ones, all kinds of different varieties. Aubergines are a tropical plant. They love a warm climate. That's probably why we've had such a good season this year, because they've been so warm. In the UK, aubergines are typically grown as an annual. When you see them flowering and they're producing really well, and you've had a good season like we've had this year, it's hard to just let those plants die over winter. In the native climate, these things are a short-lived annual, so they'll live 5-6 years quite comfortably. I've seen these plants grow to bigger than me and wider than me and into big bushes, and the stems become really woody and really thick, and that gives them the structure to continuously produce aubergines through the years. Now in the UK, we typically have this sort of green growth, this very soft type of green growth, and that's because we're growing them as annuals. Now what I'm going to aim to do is I'm going to try and keep my aubergines going for as long as possible, both outside, and I'm going to even overwinter some as well. With a plant like this that's been really heavily productive, as it's getting a little bit colder, I can start to see leaves that are starting to wilt and starting to die back. Any signs of that sort of thing, I'm going to just get rid of, because I don't want the risk of any disease in here. And I want to increase airflow as much as possible, especially to the centre of the plant. So anything in the middle, let's just get rid of that. So with this plant, my aim is to keep it going as long as possible. In a milder sort of climate that doesn't freeze, you might be able to get away with overwintering these in the greenhouse. Now, I've never managed to overwinter them in the greenhouse in the north of the UK, but it is possible. Just be careful not to snip off any stems or any young fruits that are developing. You can see how much I've taken off that plant. It's really opened it up. It's going to let a lot more light into the plant, and I'm going to take that branch out actually there. It's going to let a lot more light into the plant. It's going to allow these fruits to mature and grow as much as I need them to. It's going to allow plenty of airflow into this plant, and that's going to be great for preventing, diseases around humidity and stuff like that. With a plant that's been as productive as the one that I've just trimmed, now we've had probably, I think there's about 20 aubergines on there right now, and I think we've harvested about 20 others off it. So my aim for that plant wouldn't be to try and overwinter that one. It's just going to be to try and keep that growing as long as possible. I've got an aubergine right at the bottom, one of the first fruit to set, and that's the one I'm using to save seeds. Do watch out for pests that are attacking aubergines. So I just found that aubergine and there's a slug inside it eating it, so I've just snipped the slug, but I'm going to snip off these bad bits and we're going to eat the rest. Normally with leaves, you'll see me chopping and dropping them. At this time of year, with the type of leaves that I'm trimming off, I won't chop and drop these things, because I want any possibility of bacterial infections. I want to try and limit that as much as I can. So anything like this, I'm just going to take it to the compost pile and we'll compost it over there in a bit more of a safer environment. If you do decide to overwinter your large plants, then what I'd do is, when you're satisfied that you've had all your aubergines off it, I'd trim a plant like this back to there, and just leave maybe 2 or 3, just leave a handful of structural large branches on it, and everything else can go. And then I'd apply a really thick, heavy set of mulch onto it. So I'd apply at least 2 or 3 inches of mulch there, and then when it gets really cold, I'd be covering it with horticultural fleece or some kind of covering, even in the greenhouse, because you want any risk of cold to stop it. So that's what I'd do. Maybe where you've had exposed ends, to stop them from drying out, just apply a little bit of wax. It's a tip that people use. I don't use it, but it's a tip that people do use. If you've got an unheated conservatory, you could take a plant like this and put it into the conservatory after doing all the trims that I just mentioned. As long as it's light and it's frost free, they should be okay. I mean, a lot of people will struggle to overwinter something that size because the pot's quite large, it's got a lot of fruit on it, it's got sticks that are sticking out. It might be a little bit unsafe and a little bit untidy for people to put into the houses. So that's the problem I have. So I wouldn't overwinter something in a pot as large as that. The nights are getting a little bit colder, so you want to try and get these things moved into the house as soon as possible. Now this plant has got quite a few fruit on it still, and if it wasn't, and some of them are a few weeks away from maturity yet. These big ones can be picked, but those small ones just need a little bit more time to get to where I want them to be. I'm going to keep this one growing for as long as I can in here. There are plants and specimens that I am going to overwinter. Let's go and have a look at those ones. One of the things that I did was, as my aubergines were growing, the really large, good-looking plants, I got them into the ground and I got them to produce, I got them into the best spots. But I saved some of the more stunted ones, and I kept them growing in smaller pots, and I knew that I'd have a chance of overwintering these guys. And luckily enough, I mean, even my small stunted plants, this is a 2-litre pot, and even my small stunted plants have produced a few aubergines. This is the one that I'm going to overwinter. For me, it's a manageable size. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to trim off any of these large, old leaves. They're going. And for this plant, there's no need to trim off make any structural changes. This growing tip here is, I'm going to take that off as well. So we'll take that growing tip off and just allow it to continue like that. Now with this one, I'm going to store it somewhere where it's nice and, it's definitely going to be frost free. It's going to get a little bit of light. This is our living room window. It doesn't get a great deal of light in here, so ideally I would have liked better conditions. And because they would have liked better conditions, that's exactly why I've got one in the bathroom window. I'm not going and videoing in the bathroom, but I've got one in the bathroom window. And this is pretty much south facing, so it's going to get a lot of sunlight in there. And I've done the same thing to that one. Now, what happens is, if all you've got are large plants and all you've got are plants that you can't, that you haven't grown in small pots deliberately to overwinter. Now, what do you do then? What do you do with plants that that you want to move from the ground, from large pots into smaller pots, ready for you to grow indoors? Let's go and have a look. So this is not a particularly healthy looking plant, so I wouldn't even try and overwinter something like this. All I want to do is try to get the maximum harvest off it and then forget about it. But here's a plant that's looking really good. I mean, it's a really strong plant, but it's in a large pot and I can't get that inside my house to overwinter. So my mum's probably been already out and trimmed up all these leaves. So what I'm going to do is finish the job off on this one. So I'm going to trim back all of that. Before I do any major sort of root work, I'm going to get rid of all these leaves. Now, getting rid of all these leaves is very important, because when you trim the roots and when you mess about with the roots, the plant's going to go into shock. I'm going to take off that growing end. All of that is off. All of that is off. There you go. And it looks quite drastic. Now that one hasn't got all the structural shape like I would have ideally wanted, but it's okay. When it starts growing again next year, it's going to start growing side shoots from those branches, as you can already see. So what I'm going to do with this guy is, this guy's getting taken out of his pot. So the whole plant's coming out. Gently does it. You don't want to. We're going to be rough, but we don't want to be too rough. We don't want to break the plant before we've even started. And as you can see, it's got this amazing looking root ball. Any loose soil, knock it off straight away. Just knock off any loose soil. That's all off. There's nothing like a cold day to be sifting around with cold water, washing plants' roots. Woo! So we're going to wash as much soil off as possible. See, this is how I do a root trim, rather than try and trim a plant's roots while everything's attached, and then I can see what I'm doing. Okay, so lovely healthy roots. Okay,
Find you the lamb. That big
boy. So now that I've got the aubergine pretty much cleaned up, this is the pot I want to fit it to. Now, sticking all that in there, you're just going to end up with a mass of roots, and that's not what I want. So I'm going to trim off all these side roots, give it a good root trim, and I'm going to go down the bottom as well and get all that bottom section off. That's a much more manageable plant into there. So I'm going to go for a compost that isn't too nutritious either. It's a lot of woody material, but it's a lot of wood chips in here as well. So get that all in there. And just pack it in tight. Make sure it's nice and straight and nice and firmed in. Just remember the structure of the roots. There's a lot of gaps, so when you water this, it's going to settle and the soil's going to water in between those gaps, so you might have to top this up a little bit, which is fine. Now, this is perfect to go inside the house. It's in a nice small container. You can put it somewhere on a windowsill without any trouble. Aubergines will continue, if they're given the right conditions, they will continue to grow over winter. But in a pot like this, because we've restricted the roots, we'll restrict the size of the plant and we'll restrict the growth. As the temperature drops, they will grow a lot slower anyway. So that's perfect to overwinter inside now. Now, the same process can be done with plants that are in the ground, but you just need to make sure when you dig them up, dig a little bit away from the plant, quite a bit away from the plant, so you get plenty of soil and as little, you're not ripping out any of the roots when you're pulling it out. So that plant, just pull it out like that. So this one hasn't got as big of a root structure as the others, so we're not going to need to wash anything off and do all the palaver around root trimming. So with this one, just find a pot that's going to be big enough to accommodate it. Get a pot with a little bit of compost in the bottom and drop them in, and there we go. Now that's going to be perfect for overwintering. Again, with this plant, trim back the leaves, and that'll be fine for going on a windowsill. So we've got two plants ready to go inside. A similar thing can be done with chilies. I'll leave a link for my chili overwintering video at the end of this video, and you can go and have a look at that. You can even overwinter tomatoes like this, but for me, overwintering tomatoes just isn't worth it. I hope you like what you watched. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe for regular updates. I'll see you on the next one. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.